Hey everyone, Zach here, and welcome to lesson 75 of this RTS tutorial series. In this video, we'll be setting up our unit's fear levels. We'll be creating several new functions to get this to work across a few different blueprints we have. That said, at the very start, there'll be a section I've edited in that addresses a fix that comes from section 5 of the series, I believe. That said, fire up your editor and let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to the editor. I'm recording this after I've recorded the main part of the video. It got pointed out to me there's a slight bug. As you can see, I have the Marquee selector on. And we already know there's one bug with the Marquee selector that I'm currently working on. There's a second one that I didn't realize is there. With the Marquee selector active, I'm going to right-click this unit, and you can see the Marquee selector is still there, and it won't go away now. This is something that's actually easy to fix. If you go to your player controller, and you find your right-click commands or whatever you've done as your secondary actions, all we need to do is put one more check in here. We're going to also move this to our bool folder. So the check we need to do is we need to check, are we holding a button down? If you look back up your primary action, all we have if we are doing a Marquee select is we set our holding input as true. So when we start Marquee select, this is true. When we release it, it is false. So this is a fairly easy fix. We're going to grab all of these branches here. We're just going to move them down a little bit. All right. I'm also going to move this down just a little bit further. We're going to break that, and we're going to put one more branch in here. And what we're going to check on this branch is, are we holding that input select down? Or holding input down. If we are, then we do not want anything to happen. If this is false, however, then we want our right click to work. So, if we hit play, let's find that infantry unit I was messing with. Here's our Marquee. I'm right clicking, nothing is happening. I unselect the unit because I've selected it, and I right click, and we can open that up. Alright, that said, let's jump on to the main video. You'll have a second introduction. Welcome back to the editor, everybody, and in this video we'll be setting up our fear timers and the functions required for that. So let's get started by going to, oddly enough I'm in the right folder already, our unit master. And in our unit master, let's close out everything except for our event graph. Alright, so let's go down to the very bottom here. We're going to create a new custom event. And this custom event is going to be trigger combat timer. Now this isn't the normal sort of timer we're going to be using for our AI. This is just to keep track of when a unit that is not an infantry unit is in combat. However, this also will trigger for infantry units in the current setup when they're being attacked, so we might need to address that as well. We're just going to create this event for now, but we need to create some functions first. We need to create two new functions. And the first one will be set is in combat. So set in combat is just going to flag using a Boolean variable that our character is in combat. So we're going to create that variable now, and it's going to be is in combat. I'm going to drag this, and I'm going to set it here as a setter. I'm going to take from this Boolean input pin and place it in this input pin here. And then I'm just going to put a return node in. Next, I'm going to create another variable, which will be get is in combat. And this is going to be a pure variable. Sorry, pure function. I don't know if I said variable. And it's going to have one return node. Of course, it always has one return node. Not always, but I'm going to get is in combat as a getter, and I'm just going to pin the return value into that return node, and we can go back to our event graph here. So now that we have that, what we're going to do is we are going to set is in combat as true here. So when this event is triggered, we want to set them to being is in combat. We then are going to, and this is jumping the gun a bit, so I know the logic might make no sense, but I'll walk you through it again. We are going to set our status and our AI. Now let's go look at our AI real quick. So we go to our blueprints, our AI, and we go to our AI controller, and we close out all of these except for our event graph. We have here this set status, and we have our fatigue timers, our hunger timers, and these extra pins. Well, coming off this one will be our fear timers. So all we're doing is we're triggering this event so we can change over our fear timers. So we will get the reference we have to our AI controller. We will set status, and then we will put a delay in, and we'll have this delay for 5 seconds, which can be a fair amount of time in our game world. You might consider getting game time and plugging a calculation in with game time to set the duration here. I'm just doing this purely for testing purposes. And again, when you're working on a game like this, you would have your own sort of delays and timers you're going to use, so you'd fine tune it based on the balancing needed. Next, I am going to duplicate both of these nodes, and I'm going to paste them on the other side there. I'm going to set is in combat as false, and I'm just going to put a reroute in here. And I'm going to come off this reroute and plug it into our set status. So what's happening in this line of events here is a unit gets attacked. This will be triggered. When this is triggered, we will set them to being in combat. We'll update their status. Every time they're attacked, this will trigger. So after the last time they're attacked, if they survive, after 5 seconds, we can assume they're no longer in combat. So we'll turn off is in combat. We'll set it to false. And then we'll reset the timers we're going to have in our status check. So where do we call this event up at? Well, if we go to our reduce health here, we're going to call it in our reduce health function. Now, however, I'm going to start categorizing these because they're driving me crazy. They're not being in any category. So it's going to be stat, health. This will be stat or stats master, because we might want to use these elsewhere. They don't always have to pertain to what the fear timers. And I'm also going to just move these into a category called display, because they're about display of information. Okay, so let's go to our reduce health. And I'm just at the very start of my reduce health going to break this here, and I'm going to call trigger combat timer. So anytime they actually take damage, not every time they're attacked, but anytime they take damage, they're going to be triggered to be in combat. Now, you might want to do it anytime they're attacked. So if you want to do it that way, you'd get the target unit in the infantry unit and call the trigger combat timer, which actually might be a more realistic approach, because bullets flying at you are going to trigger stress even if they aren't hitting you. But for now, we're going to leave it here, and we can adapt this later on and change it to be more realistic if we want. Next, let's go to our infantry unit. So let's go back to our main window. And notice I have left the AI controller open because we do need to go back there at some point. All right, so let's open up our infantry unit. And in here, what we want to do is we want to, at the end of this line, this event attack here, we want to set is in combat. And remember, because this is a child, we can just call this up. So set is in combat. This will be true. And again, we can call up our AI controller from the parent. So we're going to get our AI controller reference, and we are going to set status. All right, I am just going to duplicate these nodes down here at the end of the combat chain. So if they end up killing a unit, if the target is not available, then we set them to no longer do damage, and we turn off the set is busy. Also, this means that if they accidentally damage themselves, because reduce health here, if they have a critical failure, it will trigger the set is in combat timer again anyway. Fortunately, however, this will trigger multiple times during combat. Also, as I said, if you want to have it be more realistic, this is what you would use. You'd use this pin here, or you'd call it up again, and then you would call the set is in combat. The target would be that target unit, and then you can set it there. If they die, then it doesn't matter turning it off. Okay, so that takes care of the units side of it. Now we actually need to do the fear-based components. So the way we are going to do that is if we go to our AI controller, I'm just going to move this to the end here, we are going to create 3 functions, one to set the timers and one for what the timers will do. And these timers are going to be a little bit different than our previous setup. So the first thing I want to do actually is create my increase fear timer. So I'm going to get a new function, or create a new function. This will be increase fear. And we're going to do this backwards. We're going to start at the end, and then we're going to do the middle part and then the first part, because the logic in this is easier to explain that way. So first thing I want to do is I want to get a reference to my unit. I am going to pull off of this, and I want to get its fear as a setter, or not get, but I want to get the set fear, and put a rerouting here. I want to get fear. So this part should look familiar from what we've done previously. We get and set fear or hunger or fatigue, a very similar way there. So all of the beginning part of this that we're doing, which is going to be the very end of this function, should seem familiar. The value to what we're going to set it will be a clamped value, just like before. And we're clamping this as a float with a min of 0 and a max of 1. So what are we going to add into this clamp? This is where it's going to get a bit different and why we're going to do this a bit backwards. So we're going to take our fear and we're going to add it to something. And I'm just going to drop it into this pin here. I'm going to plug that into our value there. So what do we add into here? Well, what we're going to add in is our usual divide. So this divide, remember, is to turn whatever timer we put into here into hours. So when we have whatever value we pass into here, it will get divided across an hour. So we have the hunger or fatigue timers, our values that we plug in. So if we go into here and grab this fatigue delta, this 0.25, this 25% is 25% across an hour when we plug it into this. However, it isn't just going to be a delta fear or a change in fear. We're going to have a fear modifier as well. So we're going to create 2 variables now. And the first one will be delta fear, where delta just means change in. It will be a float. And, ooh, that's not what I meant to do. And our second modifier will be a Our second variable will be a fear modifier. Now I want to compile it. And I'm going to set my delta fear to be 25%, so 0.25. And I'm going to set my fear modifier to be 1. So the reason why I'm saying it to be 1 is what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply our percentage that we're going to change our fear by our modifier. I do not want it to be less than 1. So fear will always change at least a rate of 25% an hour. As this modifier gets bigger, the percentage which it will change will also get bigger. So this is what actually will be setting our fear at the very end of everything. I'm just going to line those up. Now, we need to set our fear modifier. So this is actually going to set fear, but we need to set our fear modifier. Actually, I'm going to smooth this up here, if I can figure out where I'm at in my graph. And let's take care of the middle part first. So we're going to set our fear modifier twice. So let's just put these into a category real quick of our status, subcategory fear. Do the same thing for this one here. So let's grab our fear modifier. We want to set it. And we are going to set it to be the fear modifier plus something else. Like I said earlier, we are going to set this in the beginning as well. So let's think about what can modify our fear. If we are hurt, or if we're tired, or if we're hungry, all three of those things can actually modify our fear. So all we're going to do is two of those, not all three. We're going to take care of if they're damaged, so if they're hurt, and if they're fatigued. So what I want to do is I want to take this value, and I want to get my unit ref. We're going to have a couple of these unit refs in here, by the way. And I want to get my max health. I also want to get my current health. And I want to know what I want to divide my max health by my current health. Now, the reason for this is if we go the other way around, as they are less injured, they are going to have a greater modifier to their fear. We want them to have a lower modifier the healthier they are, and the more injured they are, we want more fear. Now, to actually have this value work properly, that was not what I wanted to do, we have to divide this return value by 10. You can play around with the numbers a bit. What I did was I opened up an Excel spreadsheet, and I just plugged in a few numbers, did some math, and worked out what algorithm I liked best to modify this. And I don't want to modify it too much. Remember, we're multiplying this by 25. This is multiplying into 25%. If this is suddenly a value of 4, then every hour they're going to gain a max fear, and that's going to cause problems. I want this to increment just slightly. So we don't want to trigger this, however, every single time that we go through this increased fear. We only want to trigger this if they are damaged. So we're going to go back off of this and put a branch in. In fact, I'm going to come out a bit from there. And before we go any farther forward, I'm just going to grab our original set fear node here. And I'm going to come off the execute pin on the first fear modifier we've done so far and plug it directly into our set fear here. There we go. And just to make my life a tiny bit easier, I'm going to grab all these nodes and I'm going to lower them a bit. I'm going to put a reroute here. And I'm just going to come off this false. So if they're not injured, we're going to bypass all of this, go right into that false, and carry on with updating our fear. So even if they aren't injured, or fatigued, even when we get to that part, they might still be in combat, and thus their fear levels are going to increase. Now, what we're going to do here for our condition is we're going to grab these 3 nodes, plus the reroute, I guess, Control W them over here, and I'm just going to reverse the order they're in, because now you want to know, are they injured? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to we're going to check, is our current health less than our max health? If so, then, and only then, do we want to trigger this event. Alright, so we've set our fear modifier based on our damage. So if we are damaged, how bad is the damage? Add that to our base modifier, and then we are going to take our delta fear, so 25%, multiply it by the fear modifier, spread it over an hour, add it to our current fear, which should be 0, and then set our fear to that new value in this range of 0% to 100%. Now, as I said, we're going to set fear modifier twice. So I'm going to take all of this, and I'm just going to move it along a tiny bit, and we are going to set it for the first time. Actually, I'm going to need a little bit more room than that. So the first time we're going to set our fear modifier is based on fatigue. And I'm doing fatigue first because we are guaranteed that the fatigue is not going to be 0. So again, we're going to grab our fear modifier. We are going to set it. And what we are going to set it to be is the current fear modifier. So as they get more fatigued, their fear modifier will get worse. And we are going to add to it another float. So let's plug this into here. So we know the return value is going to go into there directly. And what we're going to add into our fear modifier here is our unit's current fatigue level divided by 4. Now, I chose to divide by 4 just because it gave me a nice number that goes into here that doesn't make it too large. You can divide by any number you think might work. Again, what I did was an Excel spreadsheet, plugged in different numbers, I'm not sure why I typed in D, and found that 4 gave me the best result. I would not recommend going greater than 4. Sorry, less than 4. I'd recommend going greater if you're going to use a different number. So the larger the number here, the smaller the value being added in. Remember, we're dealing in percentages or proportions, actually. So when we're dealing in proportions, we want those numbers to be smaller when we add them together. Otherwise, the final proportion can be really massive, and that can cause some balance issues in the game. But that is something you'd work out at the very end. So that part is fairly easy. I'm going to have another branch, though, at the start of this. And this branch, what I'm going to do with it, and again, I'm going to need a bit more room, so I'm just going to move these nodes down a bit further, is I want to check what our fatigue level is. And remember, we have those critical values we put in last time, or a few videos ago. I'm not going to use the actual critical value. I'm also going to grab this unit ref and fatigue here, and I'm going to duplicate it over here. I'm going to grab a value between our critical value and our base I want to sleep value. So our base want to sleep is 0.5, and if I remember correctly, our critical value is 0.8 or 0.9. Yeah, it's 0.8. I'm going to grab 0.75. So when their fatigue is at 75% or greater, then their fatigue levels will modify their fear modifier, or their fear levels. All right, we're going to plug that into the execute. I'm just going to line that up a bit better so we have a little bit less room to worry about. Or you'll see what I mean in half a second. We're going to take this false in a minute and plug it into the other side of what we're going to do. We're going to plug this fear modifier setter into this branch here, and I'm just going to line these nodes up a little bit nicer. There we go. And after that fear modifier, I'm going to put a reroute in. And if their fatigue is not greater than 75%, I want to bypass all of this. And I'm just going to plug that into there, put another reroute in, and let's just line this up a little bit higher so we're above the other condition check there. So, all right, let's walk through this line by line again. So our fear timer is, our increased fear is triggered. We check, is our fatigue level greater than 75%? If it is, then we take that level, divide it by 4, add it into our current fear modifier, which remember is a base of 1, and then set our fear modifier to that. If it is not, we just bypass all of this, and then check, is the unit injured? If the unit is injured, then we get the proportion by which the unit is injured. We take that proportion and we divide it by 10, and we add that into our fear modifier. If the unit is not injured, then we bypass the fear modifier based on injury. And any way this goes, we end up setting our fear at least by 25% per hour if modified by the fear modifier. All right, so that's our increase fear. Let's duplicate this, and we'll do our decrease fear. So our decrease fear is going to be pretty much the same. If they are injured, if they're injured or fatigued, then we do not want them to decrease at the same rate as they would if they're healthy. We want them to decrease more slowly. So what we're going to do, first off, is we're going to delete this. We're going to grab these nodes and just move them out of the way. we are going to move this up here. We are going to drag off of here and do float minus float. And we're going to plug that value into there. I'm just going to line those up a bit better. There we go. We're going to delete this pin. We are going to take the delta fear and we are going to divide it by our fear modifier. That way, if the fear modifier is at its base, we're still decreasing our fear by 25% every hour. But if it is greater than 25%, then this number will get smaller. Making it smaller means it takes more time for their fear to decrease. And I'm going to plug that value into here. All right, so that takes care of our actual timing on how we increase and decrease fear. So, or if I said decrease twice, increase and decrease. The next bit is setting up our timer. So we're going to do that out here. It's going to be a little bit confusing, but it should be fairly simple. So what we're going to do is we are going to start like we normally do with a branch, but this time, unlike these first two, we actually have the values we need for this condition check. We want to get our unit reference. We want to get from our unit reference get is in combat. There's that pure function. We're going to take this value and plug it into there. Next, what we're going to do is we're actually going to skip plugging anything into the true and false because we now need those nodes that we didn't have for this condition check in the previous two here off the false and off the true. We are going to do a set timer by function name. We're going to duplicate it. And it will be looping for both of these. The set timer speed, which should be in our timers here, will go into our time. There we go. Let's just move these down a tiny bit. And this first one will be our increase fear, and because I'm paranoid about me misspelling this, I'm just going to copy and paste the name into here. And I'm going to do the same for the decrease fear. And I'm off the return value, I'm going to promote to variable. This variable will be increase fear timer handle. I'm going to do the same down here, promote to variable, decrease fear timer handle. And next, all I'm going to do is I'm going to get my decrease fear timer handle, and I'm going to pause this timer handle. I'm going to put a reroute into here just so it looks a little bit neater. And I'm going to plug that into my setup there, and then just move this here. I'm going to inverse this setup down here with my increase fear timer handle, pause timer by handle, go into my false, plug that in, and then just going to line that up. Unfortunately, we are going to cross pins slightly here, or lines. There we go. That sets up our fear timer handles and everything we need to do for them. I'm going to grab all of these nodes. I'm going to collapse to function. This will be my set fear timers. Now, before I go into there, I'm just going to quickly put these into categories. So our increased fear should be in our timers. Let's put that into timers as well. Let's go into our increase fear. And at the very end here, all we're going to do is we're going to put a return node in, just as good practice and form. You actually technically don't need them, but if you've worked in C++, you probably, like me, and just like to have that sort of return value there. All right, there we go. Now, that takes care of everything we need to do in this video. If you want to test this out, what you can do is you can add breakpoints throughout this, and you can take your infantry unit, which is somewhere around this map, and send it to attack another unit. I would recommend, if you do this, however, that you turn your current fatigue timers down. Remember, they're at a fairly high value as it is. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll do something we've already done, or similar to what we've already done, which is we will add in a fear level progress bar here so we can actually check what their fear levels are and see them increase and decrease. After that, we will take care of our behavior tree for what to do for our units when they have a certain fear level. Alright, all of that said, if you've liked this video, make sure to hit that like button down below. It lets me know that I'm bringing you content that you value. And make sure to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next tutorial is out. If you want to help support the channel further, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. At the third tier, you will get access to the completed progress file when the tutorial series is done. And at the level above that, not only will you get access to the completed file, you will also get access to the in-progress version of the code. All of that said, I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.